welcome guys to the Orion Growth Virtual Meeting Space here in Open Campus, powered by VIrbela. Dave, Cairns, and I are happy to host you again today. As always, John is over here to my left, Ramser from Orion. He's capturing the footage of today. So please feel free to introduce yourself and talk to him about your experience or ask any questions. We're going to publish today's discussion in its full length and uncut version on Orion Growth YouTube. So anything you say, Ken, will be used against you. Just wanted to remind you of that. Somewhere in here, Sarah's at the table. She's the VIP of community for Open Campus, and Sarah and her team were a bunch to get our guests and some of the visitors and speakers accommodated with any tech issues and general wayfinding. So thank you immensely, guys, from OC. We, as you know, we appreciate everything you do in helping make the unfamiliar easier. So, wow, season 2 coming to a close. What an amazing season it's been. This is the, I think, 18th or 19th time that we've been together. So to recap real quick, our theme this season was authenticity. And the topics covered were community building and Web3, how people are really feeling, the future of team retreats, deepening the intergenerational connection, unpacking the data on remote work, designing for neurodiversity in the workplace, future of education, solopreneurship. Hey, we're going to wrap it up with global citizenship. So I want to thank all of our amazing contributors and guests for being a part of this growing community. We've cracked about 300 people. So thanks to all of you for being a part of this. And as usual, we'll take a quick break after this season to review what went well and what we can improve for next season. So plan on seeing more from us here shortly. We'll take a break and have a collective breath. So with that said, I'd like to welcome our final guests for season 2, Ernest, Chrappah, and Harmen van Sprang. I'll start with Ernest. Ernest is a dad, husband, and friend first. He is currently CEO of Ernest & Company in Washington, D.C. He's a thought leader and advisor to real estate, government, transportation, and tech executives. His resume is full of words like analyst, consultant, co-founder, executive board, Office of the State Superintendent of Education, D.C. Taxi Cab Commission, Deputy Chief, Child and Family Services, Chairman, D.C. Government, and on and on and on. His vast and diverse background enables Ernest to truly inform about the future of cities and both virtual and IRL urban planning. It's my distinct pleasure to have met him this week. Great discussion, and welcome Ernest to Inspire People, Inspire Places.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, you bet. And no stranger to the IP community for his second appearance here, thankfully. Harmen van Sprang is an urban futurist and co-founder of Sharing Cities Alliance and studio Sentience. Harmen joins us from Amsterdam, but his work is truly global. The Sharing Cities Alliance is home to a unique group of urban professionals who utilize the power of sharing to navigate the opportunities and challenges of this decisive decade. They work with cities like Amsterdam, New York, Cape Town, Singapore, and Washington, D.C. An innovation expert and keynote speaker, Harmen's a freelancer for the United Nations Economic Commissions for Europe, based out of Geneva, and is a principal member of the Metaverse Standards Forum. He's worked with Immersive Academy, Immersive City Lab, and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in Isle of Wight, England. He's clearly a thought leader with tremendous vision for our future, and I'm honored to call him a friend. Welcome, Harmen.
Thank you so much, Chris and Dave. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks for all the support in season 2, everybody. And I think Mike is yours, my dude.
Thank you, and great intro. And Harmen, I want to just give you a special thanks for not only being a second guest, but also helping bring Ernest to the table here. I'm super excited for this conversation. And as I've told both of you guys on our last call, I really try to keep my mind open leading up to these conversations to try to let in whatever comes to me on the day. And not unlike or too dissimilar to our last chat with Harmen, I was talking with my wife earlier this morning. Luckily, our daughter stayed in bed long enough to give us a little bit of time. And we were talking about what it means to be a global citizen. So here's my best crack at opening this conversation. We're here to talk about what that looks like on a go forward basis, how to be a good human. And I spent a lot of time thinking about the best way to kick it off and arrived at the conclusion that reflecting on what has been a bizarre shared experience brought on by COVID is really the way to go. So I'm going to do my best here. I want to highlight what I feel are the key phases of this shared pandemic journey as a way of framing the conversation. And this is my best attempt, so I look forward to everybody else's perspective as we carry this forward. So phase one, I'm calling it the unity phase. People were creating music together, socially isolated on balconies. We got to see pictures of what the world looked like free of smog. And we got invited into each other's living rooms, bedrooms, and personal relationships while we conducted business. Unity phase. Second phase, vaccine lead up and rollout phase. This phase to me felt more like the upside down world, if you've ever seen the show Stranger Things. We debated vaccine conspiracy theories, Floyd's horrific death happened, insurrection happened in Washington, and groupings of people with different levels of privilege started to experience the world very differently than others all of a sudden again. Phase three, back to normal. Once the pandemic restrictions were lifted, all of a sudden, people were back to normal activities like larger group gatherings, such as concerts and travel. Employers were pushing for a return to office, mass layoffs started happening, and our days started to become more quote unquote linear again. Phase four, what I'm calling present day abnormal. Many have returned to the office but feel really yucky about it. Horrific world events such as what's happening in Israel right now are still happening, but we're experiencing these tragedies in a more deep and confusing way than before. Critical US election looms, and people's relationship with post-pandemic, post-traumatic growth is varying greatly. Say that 2024 is not a time to discuss what it means to be a global citizen feels like the definition of insanity to me. It absolutely is the right time to discuss our interconnectedness as a global workforce. It absolutely is the time to discuss being an active member of our community as we spend less time in and around those environments because the world is open again. And it absolutely is the time to discuss how we can take matters into our own hands that feel out of our sort of depth or control, such as the climate crisis, social media, AI, or divided politics. It really feels like humanity is on the precipice in so many ways. And the definition of that word just feels so fitting to me. Here it is, a very steep rock face or cliff, especially a tall one. So to kick this conversation off to transition, because life is this just one giant paradox, I want to kick off our first question with a paradox, a simple but hard question. And here it is. As humans, we've always been on the precipice of something. But what does it mean to be on the precipice in 2024? And I would love to start with Ernest.
Wow. What does it mean to be on the precipice of something? I have to take a deep breath on that one, because the challenge in answering the question is not so much the ability to see into the future, but more importantly, the ability to ground yourself wherever you are at. So in my grounded position, as I overlook the snow that is melting away on my driveway and the sidewalks, what I think we're on the precipice of is a reckoning of the purpose of life. What do we want to leave behind? What do we want to tackle? And how are we going to recover from the inevitable challenges that we face? That's my view on, looking ahead based on where I sit and stand right now.
I love that. And I will let that hang short for now. Harmen, what about you, man?
I think I also have to take a deep breath here. So many things come to mind. One of the first things that I was thinking when you were talking about COVID and post-pandemic is, of course, that we're all really fed up with, I think, the pandemic already since it happened. But the crazy thing is that I think, especially, for all of us, but especially I think also for a younger generation, looking, for example, at my kids, nobody's ever talking about it anymore. And that's weird, So we leave a like maybe, let's say, a 2-year gap in their young lives, which is, well, never seen before, at least not for them. And we don't seem to care about it anymore. We don't talk about it. And of course, it's painful. We don't want to go back there. But, you know, I just read something about the House of Beautiful Business, which is a very interesting sort of business community. And they're talking about grief, and maybe that we should be talking about grief more also in business life, for example, because we are saying goodbye to so many things. And I think we're also in the midst of developments that it could be politics in the US, or indeed the situation in Israel and Gaza, or you name it, maybe personal crises, finding indeed your purpose of life and work. So these are just one of the things that I'm thinking of, firstly, relating to your question, but I think maybe it's more right than ever before that we are in a sort of flux or grief, maybe even, and that is painful, and I think therefore even more a reason to get together and talk about it and figure out how we would like to design our future and make it positive, or as positive as possible at least, and making sort of sense of the sanity that we are sometimes part of.
That was
That would be
great.
my 2 cents.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot, Harmen. And I think your comments on grief are really profound, because I think that in many ways we're grieving a lot of what it is to be human in this world, having been able to see it from a different vantage point because of this sort of shared experience that we've gone through. Then I think this acute sort of like shift inside of all of us that was brought on by an external event has actually created a lot of grief in our lives. A lot of, as Chris has kind of pointed out to me, using this word, I'd never heard it before, but post-traumatic growth is also a factor. But I think grief really isn't being talked about enough. So Ernest, before we like move forward, I wondered if you had any more thoughts on what Harmen's saying about grief here. And then in addition to that, I'm wondering if you could maybe comment on what you think the differing perspectives might be in terms of how 2023 went for people. Because when we were on our first call together, you were talking about how it was a great year for you. And I'm really happy for you that was the case. For me, it was actually one of my hardest years. And so I'm feeling like there's this tension in the world of like everybody having gone through some of these experiences that were shared in very different ways. And I'm just curious if you can help us pull some of the strings together on that.
When Harmen was talking and he mentioned grief, it hit me, and I had to think for a second how I view grief, and also understand why I look at grief that way. But I'll start off by saying I feel grief is a state of mind or feeling that you can never be prepared for. No matter how hard you try, when it hits you, you face that moment of truth. And I come from a background where death or people transitioning, which brings some grief, is celebrated in an elaborate way that can be shocking to other people. I was born in Ghana, and if you like, just Google this idea of Ghanaian coffins or Ghanaian coffin celebration. You'll find that the way people deal with somebody transitioning to another world or the afterlife or wherever you want to call it, if, for example, you liked, Lamborghinis, or your casket can be made in that form, and that is how you are sent off. People can wait a year, 2 years, 3 months to prepare to send a loved one or somebody who's deceased away, but they have to do it in style and do it the right way. So it's a big part of the culture. And during the activity itself, it's a celebration, music, dancing, talking, bringing people together. So the culture has established that mechanism of dealing with grief, yet one or a special one, it is really, really painful. So I say that to say, I feel strongly that grief is something that you can never be prepared for. And no matter how hard you try, when you face that reality, you would know that it is upon you. 2023, I felt it was a great year for me personally and professionally because of the choices that I made and also the luck that I had after 12 years working for 3 different mayors and helping transform a bunch of city agencies, improving the lives of DC residents. I felt it was time to press pause and reevaluate and see what else I wanted to do with myself. That led to months of just hanging out with my family, being present, enjoying having to even take my kids to school, picking them up, being a chaperone, and just doing things that I didn't really do when I was present. Because during the time of working, I had 2 phones, always mentally thinking about something else. And I just felt liberated. After a while, I wanted to get active again, sort of like professionally, and decided to take a risk and become an entrepreneur and start consulting. I didn't have like no massive business plan or a marketing strategy or complicated roadmap. Just started talking to people in private. And I had the opportunity to do some really impactful work. That was 2023. And as the year ended, I had the opportunity to celebrate my parents' 70th and 80th birthday party in Ghana. And I couldn't have done all of this if I had not taken some risk and I didn't find some luck along the way. So I said this to say 2023 was great personally and professionally because of the decisions I made and the luck that I had. But it was really a year about personal reflection and also being vulnerable and accepting the idea that if you've not figured everything else out, it's okay, provided you can surround yourself with good people and do good in the world.
Thank you. That I love what you shared about how you experience grief and how you share grief in your culture, because it actually, I think, is one of the missing links to how a lot of people in the modern world are experiencing the challenges that they're going through. They're often experiencing them on their own. So that was a really amazing way of reframing. And I really, really like the way that you articulated why 2023 was a good year for you. And I think that that's a good way to connect into the next phase of this conversation, because many of us have gone through what you described in our own ways to sort of break away from things that didn't work for us and try to grow into new versions of people that live inside of us. But not everybody has had the same equal opportunity to figure that out. And so for both of you, I want to leave this question very open-ended, and I'll start with Harmen. You both are playing in the space of shaping the future of cities, shaping the future of humanity. Really, that's where your brain resides. So simple question, but I'd love whatever depth comes from you from inside. How can we best enact the change we want to see in the world? So Harmen, I'd just love to get your take on whatever's topical for you in that regard today.
First thing that comes to mind, and thanks Ernest for sharing vulnerably your sort of journey of the last year. But what you said is it's partly about being vulnerable. And I think that's really a great tool to interconnect with people. And also the idea, Ernest, that you said about like no big plan, no big business plan, not a large roadmap, but just starting talking to people. It's a simple question, maybe, Dave, but it's also, I think, in that sense, a simple answer, because you have to talk to people and you have to build relationships. That is what I've been doing for a large part of my career. That is what I like most. That's maybe also partly where my talent is. That's also why, for example, I met Ernest back in 2017 for the first time in New York City when we are launching my organization, Sharing Cities Alliance. And, you know, we kept the conversation going and we started collaborating. And I've been several times to DC, where he, of course, works and worked. I had dinner with my daughter at his place and his wife and daughters, you know, so I think you have to build those relationships and be open and be vulnerable and really, I think, align on the idea that you indeed want to bring the world forward instead of pulling it apart. That is also what some people apparently like to do in these times. Yeah, so I think that's a really basic answer, but that's what it's all about. I think, you know, it also makes me think about, of course, referring back to global citizenship, to, of course, ask yourself, especially when we are convening in this case in a virtual world, what global even means if we are coming together so many times in a virtual or digital manner. And also, what does citizenship mean? Because you're part of a virtual world in many cases. So you're not related to one city or not one country or not one part of the world even. So it's also interesting to, I think, really reinvent how we see global citizenship and how we build connection while we most of the time see each other only in this way. So, for example, also with you, Dave, we never met before, but somehow there's this connection. How does this come? You know, what is in place that we feel related and that we can even sort of fantasize about home swapping our homes while we have never seen each other live before. So it's also maybe interesting to explore this a bit. Like, is it language? Is it tone of voice? Is it the sort of mutual network? Is it the thoughts and ideas that we have? So I would also like to pose that question maybe to anyone in the room to okay, how do we build those connections? Because if we have the connections, we can change the world. But connection first.
Yeah. I think the fact that you brought it to how we've interacted, Harmen, is really, really powerful for continuing this conversation, whether it's Q&A or Ernest can share some of his point of view as well, because we've effectively created these new social connections, these new social contracts that have, I think, a lot more strength because of COVID. When I look at my world before COVID, I was really truly interacting geographically constrained. I was spending very, very little time reaching around the world through the internet to get connected to other people. And I'm convinced that if COVID didn't happen, I don't believe that we'd all be sitting here right now. And that's not to actually make it about me or Chris or this conversation series. I think this is actually just but one of many different examples of how we hit a fork in the road and we went in a new direction. So Ernest, I'm curious to get your take on how we can continue to build on the digital interconnectedness of you know, people that has been the result of this pandemic, where we've learned so much more about each other and connected with people we never would have before. How do we bring that forward in a productive way?
Yeah, as far as how to bring that forward in a productive way, I would take a stab at it from the context of shaping the future of cities, because either by being direct participants based off our occupation or profession, or co-conspirators by being citizens, enablers, or supporters, we all have a role to play and we are playing it, whether we accept it or not. So how do you actually bring it to a tactical level? I would say one is advocacy on whatever you believe in or you feel strongly about. You know, get the message out, get the word out, and engage with people who have a different point of view on that particular topic, so that you can at least learn something about yourself or understand a different perspective that you would not otherwise have. Second is technology. I feel that whether it's technology that brought us vaccines during the pandemic, or technology that allows us to sit around a table today in a virtual environment by having meaningful conversations, or technology that is going to shape the way our kids consume education. Technology is part of our lives, and it will continue to shape the future of cities. It's community. If there was one thing that we probably learned during the pandemic, it was this idea that your community doesn't have to be the whole world. When there was stay-at-home orders and quarantines and what I call the enforcement folks out there, your community became your front porch or your neighbor or your local store. We're basically forced to redefine how we interact with people, what we define as community. So whether it was the dude playing music in his apartment and somebody else responding at the other end, that became a new community. Communities are what you make them to be, and the investment you put in building a community will pay off. So I will identify advocacy, technology, and community as critical factors in shaping the future of cities wherever they would go. I also want to respond to the earlier comment and your question also by sharing book that I picked up because I like the author, but after reading it, I was left wondering if we would ever have a robust way of dealing with people. The book is titled Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. And he sort of sequences different scenarios where somebody thought they had read the other individual well and were just way off. But reading the book, I wondered, okay, so when I go into meetings, is it just better to be blindfolded and interact with the next person so that we are free of our biases or the innate or subliminal factors that cause us to misjudge people based off how they speak, their mannerisms? But we can't do that. That's not real, because when you are dealing with people, you read body language sometimes, you read the room sometimes. So it's a very perplexing thing to do. And I want to share that with folks as well, so that I can get their thoughts on how you deal with strangers. Because at some level, we are all strangers to each other until we make the investment to build relationships, understand each other, and figure out how best to deal with each other through the wins and the losses.
Yeah, that deserves some clapping. That was a lot of depth. Harmen, I think it's funny. I always start these conversations with a thought on how to take them forward and end them, and I'm flummoxed now. I'm not going to lie. I have a thought on a direction, but before I maybe try that out, is there anything else that's coming to your mind based off of what Ernest just said?
Well, maybe one thing, and that is that we're, I think, sort of redefining what reality is, and that is in two ways. I think, and on the one hand, of course, we are dealing with the fact that we have more and more the situation that everybody is in his or her own silo and his own sort of truth, and I think that is, of course, really harmful. And I think we'll experience it again with the elections in your part of the world. On the other hand, of course, we have indeed these virtual and augmented realities that we are also creating, and that also has an upside, I think, where we can choose different realities, which is really fascinating, but it's also really confusing. I think part of the world maybe sometimes wants to stay more in a virtual reality than maybe in the actual reality, which I sometimes can imagine. So again, maybe a bit referring to my previous point, we have to sort of figure out what makes us a global citizen, or at least what makes connection in this blended reality that we are in. And especially, I think we also owe that again and I will say this, I think many times more, to the next generation, because Dave, you already mentioned things like social media, AI, of course, those things are coming at us, generative AI, in a very fast pace. We try to figure it out, we try to understand it, we try to sort of foresee where it goes, and we of course want to look at the upside of those technologies, but there's also quite some harm. And I think especially for a younger generation that just uses these newest technologies without maybe sometimes thinking about the implications of it. So I think we have a big responsibility as parents or as people a bit further on in our lives, to see to it how we deal with these blended realities and indeed maybe sometimes a bit of a fucked up world.
Yeah, you kind of went where I roughly wanted to go, so thank you for that.
Sure.
I actually think, just to try to maybe close this out in the next 10 minutes, I wanted to connect it to actually my own personal experience, because Harmen, you're making me think about it. And again, it's not to actually make it about me or my family's life, but just as a jumping off point. We made a big move in the pandemic and moved away from a big city and moved to a small island. And in doing so, have been in a process of individuation, as you know, my wife and I ourselves, and as a couple, away from everything we kind of left behind. But we've also been spending a lot of time talking about the kind of life that we want to build going forward. And it involves things that we would have never thought before, like starting a very small business, like a food truck concept, and just trying to actually make people's days better in a very simple way. For me, I'm wrestling with how can I leverage maybe the brand I built and the fact that I like writing and sharing online to start to maybe earn some income from that. But I'm asking myself, at what cost, right? Because I think we're living in the wild west of social media right now, where we're having to define our own guardrails for these things. And a lot of it, as you've pointed out, Harmen, is kind of, and so I guess where I'm trying to go is like, what is the ideal future state when we are genuinely living in a mixed reality, which seems very much on the horizon? Like when we see holograms and we experience our in-person world simultaneously. What is an ideal outcome, that we are actually maybe doing more of this food truck thing and less of the online thing? Or like, I really don't have much action other than that. Like, Ernest, I'm just so curious, like 10 years from now, what do you think an ideal future is for sort of an average individual? I know that's hard to answer because everyone's life is different, but like, how can the technology actually make our lives better, I guess, is my question.
10 years from now, if there's a way to accurately, and I say accurately, measure people's well-being, then I would say there should be a dramatic improvement in people's well-being. That's like one thing I would like to see, because it has downstream impacts or trickle-down effect on my community, my personal life, my family's life, my friends' life. Like, that's something that I would like to see in a very real way. What will go into calibrating that well-being will certainly vary, but there are some common elements that we generally accept today as measures of well-being, whether it's economic security, safety, and access, education, name all the factors. 10 years from now, the world has to be better, because we've just come way too far. We know a lot. There's a lot more we don't know, but we have to make the world a better place. I mean, that's just my humble opinion. And we also have to mitigate the cost of getting there, not only in terms of like dollars, but the sacrifices. If you would have to raise or displace communities just to get access to the land for farming purposes, we should ask ourselves, like, is this really worth it to destroy cultures and people's way of life because we want to create some, like, high output agricultural for our communities? It just doesn't make sense. Do we give up air quality, environmental quality, because we want to make our citizens, like, richer, yet they'll be walking around with like masks, trying to avoid, like, breathing, like, bad substances? Do we exploit so much of Africa to the point where the negative aspects of climate change disproportionately harms the very poor? Like, what is the benefit in that? There's no benefit that I see. So we really have to pause and reevaluate our individual activities, our community activities, and say, how can we contribute to improving the well-being of everyone 10 years from now? And what are the concrete steps that we can take to get there?
Thank you for that. Harmen, I'm kind of curious, as a way of framing this to close us out before we go to Q&A, like, do you talk about any of this stuff with your kids? What do you have a perspective on what younger people are focused on in relation to all this stuff that we're talking about today?
Yeah, well, I have two daughters, 14 and 17. So it's already, for me at least, a crazy idea that one of them will be an adult within this very year, which is crazy, but okay. You know, my youngest one, I took her with me on several travels around the world for my work. Several times to the US, one time to Singapore, etc. And I think I also mentioned this example in our talk last week. But one of the best ways to experience global citizenship or experience people with different backgrounds and ideas and regions where they come from is to actually go there. And of course, I was happy, especially pre-pandemic, but also a bit after, to have these travels in place for my work and to sometimes bring her with me, which has been great because, you know, she's from the first time, and I told you this example, of course, the first time she was 9 years old. First time she was 9 years old, and she went with me on a week. I live in Amsterdam, Europe, of course, and then in 1 week to DC, NYC, and Boston, which is quite an adventure, of course, especially when you're 9 and it's the first time and so far away from home and the time difference, etc. And, you know, after this very week, she asked me, like, okay, what is a job where I can travel a lot? So she was apparently hooked, you know, and that's also why I took her with me several times after. But there's also this disconnection now, I think, at least that it's my perception, with her, seeing her at school, not feeling a connection with the outside world, you know. So I told you before, there's no way any discussion anymore about, for example, COVID. There's not so much talks about, for example, the Gaza war. She would like to have discussions about climate change, etc. So it is there once in a while, but not so much. So it's mainly doing the same curriculum that is being taught at schools, at least in the Netherlands, for 50, 60 years, because that's the system. And I think a bit more maybe for her than maybe other kids, because she had to travel, or she had the opportunity to travel a bit more and see more places maybe than in general kids would at her age, is that she's seeing that, yeah, that disconnect. And I think that troubles her now because she doesn't have the motivation since a few months, and she just wants to go out there and travel and meet new cultures and people. So there's two sides to that story. I don't even know if I'm answering the question right now, but I think she at least got in touch with but also I think herself more, and got more depth because of those travels and all those encounters, etc. And that is something that you would wish, of course, any kid, but I'm very much aware that it's not possible, especially at that age or with maybe limited economic possibilities. So if we could find, again, also virtually other possibilities to let the kids in education nowadays encounter much more than their own silos, and also not their own silos in TikTok or Snapchat and their own class, but really go in different areas and different ways of thinking. I think that would be very enriching and very empowering. It would also mean, I think, if you look again at education, that you would go away a bit more from, okay, you're doing, if you're lucky, 4 or 5 years university or higher education, and then you start working for the rest of your life. Come on, let's change that. You know, let's have a lifelong learning opportunity for people that want it, and let it be globally. Let them enjoy education in virtual manners in Singapore and DC and in Cape Town and wherever they want to, you know. So I think we have this opportunity, but also the responsibility to raise them as global citizens, give them much more awareness of different cultures and backgrounds and ideas. And I think we're clearly not giving that example in the world right now.
Thank you for that. I think that what I get from what you're saying is that we know the world is so much smaller than it is physically because of these incredible technologies that we have created, but we haven't really found the best ways to actually truly meaningfully connect with each other now that the world is so small. And what I also take from what you say is that we have the opportunity to not only live nonlinear days with how we work as adults, give that same opportunity to children, you know, with the sort of mutual respect for the fact that they're not actually that much different than us in terms of their needs, wants, and desires. That's what I take from what you just said.
Yeah.
So thank you. With that, I'm going to close it and hand it over to Chris, and we can go to Q&A.
Wow. Awesome conversation. The thought that came to my mind is a quote, and then we'll go to the chat for questions. The quote is from Mark Twain. Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of people and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one life. Get out and go see it. With that, guys, it's open to Q&A. We've got some really great questions in here. I'm happy to just open it up. If anyone wants to raise, I don't even need to raise your hand. Just throw it out there if you've got a question, or I'll call on you because you know I will. Questions? Sarah, go for it. All right. That's right. Hmm.
Uh,
An awesome question. So how do we, to reframe that, how do we go back to some of the simplicity? Is that right, Sarah, in community building? Authenticity and simplicity in community building.
it's Glenn here. I got a thought on that. Um, I, I think we just have got to try not to be everywhere. Like you know, the metaverse, the social media, it allows you to look and test and dabble in everything, which is great in one sense. But you wouldn't go out in your local community and then spend 5 minutes at the opera and 2 minutes at a coffee shop and 4 minutes in the park. Like, you wouldn't do that. You might, but it's not an enriching experience. So you almost have to make choices to say, I'm going to spend 2 hours at a play. And I think we need to do the same thing online. We we tend to nibble at the massive buffet of social media versus sit down and enjoy good conversation and a good meal, and don't get worried about all the other things you're missing. Savor that, be present and savor. I think that's what path through it.
That's awesome, Glenn.
Because this, yeah, blow your mind in the circle of concern in this space.
Yeah, that's awesome, Glenn. That authenticity and being sort of present in that engagement, wherever you choose to be, right? Be yourself and try to bring some positivity to wherever you are in the world, whether it's virtual or in real life, right? Be engaged. There was somebody who said yesterday, I'll paraphrase it, I can't remember who it was, but it had something to do with the difference between time and paying attention. And there's no better gift than the gift of paying attention. We can show up in places and we can give people time, but do we really pay attention? Are we really engaged in that conversation? And that was part of what Dave and I sort of set out to do with season 2 here, with authenticity being theme and this modality being that we do put things down. I find it much easier to focus in here and pay it much more mindfulness and attention than I do on a Zoom screen.
Yeah,
So I love that, Glenn.
Chris, you're kind of like mirroring something I had in mind too, which I started thinking about, that, try to be less opinionated, especially online, because those don't lead well. But then it sort of came to mind that it's also very good to learn how to listen. So, you can be in conversations and spend a little bit more time as a listener than having to open your mouth and comment on everything, which is really what social media has driven us towards. And Sarah, that might go to some of your question, is just learning how to listen instead of
My
talk.
grandfather used to say there's a reason why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Anybody have any questions or comments, thoughts for Harmen, Ernest, or Dave, or Sarah, or anybody?
I had a question.
What's up?
So one of the reasons, to Sarah's point, that I'm a I how do I say this? So I have I'm an XR developer, but I also have systems background as well. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, how do we make sure, to me, like Sarah, I look at history and think about what mistakes that we can mitigate, right? By just analyzing that. And I feel like that spatial computing and XR in general can be a great equalizer for just society. It might take a long time, but these technologies can give us that autonomy and some of the power that's been taken away from us in a way that we have relinquished over without even knowing. So I feel like that it could this all of these converging technologies can really elevate us as human beings and put us on a more level playing field, and with larger tech corporations, for instance, or we have to, because it's not just us engaging in data, we're engaging in simulated life, right? And so how can we ensure as emerging professionals in the space that have so many interests to contribute, so many talents to contribute, how can we ensure that that happens, or is that just something are we just rolling the dice per se, or?
That's a great question. I would love to get Ernest. I would love to get your opinion on that. To frame that the way I heard it, maybe is sort of the walled garden versus open source decentralization, right? As we continue down this path, if we have an opportunity in front of us to build something that sort of elevates everybody, the conversation then becomes, is it a walled garden or is it an open source and decentralized way of doing things? Do you speak to that, Ernest?
Yeah, by default, think open is the way to go. And I arrived at that conclusion based off my own experiences, challenges, and seeing systems being developed that were particularly emerging at some point before it became mainstream. But going back to, I think his name was Jacob, or the guy who made a comment, yes, I agree that tech can be an equalizer for sure. The bigger question is, who is building the tech? Because whoever is building the tech is building it based off their point of view or their view of the world. And if they've been influenced by values or an agenda of bias, inevitably the system that is created will have some bias. That is why we're struggling with bias in AI, because who's behind the computer screen doing the coding? That is why we struggle with sometimes a public safety officer interacting with a motorist, because they are both making decisions in split seconds. And those decisions have been influenced by their point of view. So to elevate ourselves, we always have to consider the fact that we could be wrong in our interpretation or with our point of view, so that we leave a small window, not necessarily to cast doubt on our thinking, but to leave the opportunity to course correct if certain information comes to the surface that challenges some fundamental assumptions that we've done. On a more practical level, rise of DAOs and people trying to have a different financial system, or a different way of voting, or a different way of making decisions, to a broader challenge that we have, and that is we live in an imperfect world. So somebody needs to speak up, muster the courage, build coalitions and allies so that we can effect change. Not too long ago, I had to remind a colleague of mine how I got into, and it was purely from the lens of fitness. During the pandemic, when there were shutdowns, you couldn't even go out for a run or a walk. And I felt terrible. And I had Oculus that had been sitting there for a long time. I never turned it on. And I said, okay, let me give this thing a try. After poking around, I found joy and meaning in working out with others in that virtual environment. and it became a passion which had the benefit of improving health outcomes. I also recall jumping on the VIrbela platform for the first time, and the lady who gave me the intro pointed out that there were co-working spaces. And I said, hold on. So you mean time at computer doing Zoom sessions because I work from home and I have a need to interact with people? I can log in and I can be doing my work with my mic on, my mic off, and maybe serendipity can lead to something. So we have to be embracing or keep an open mind to things that we are not familiar with, open the possibility that we could get better or have better outcomes by engaging with new and interesting or things that are just not familiar with us.
Mic drop. Right. Keeping an open mind and having a community of people, follow your tribe, right? Find your tribe.
Yeah.
We're at 1:30. I have time. Other people have time, but with respect to folks' schedules who are tight, Dave, do you have any parting thoughts you'd like to throw out there? We're going to do a picture before everybody leaves, like normal, so we can post that. Thank you guys for all of your contributions to the conversation.
I guess the only thing I would say is I absolutely love doing this in this modality, this way, and it's been the most enriching experience ever to do it now for 2 seasons of this. At the same time, I would love to see all of you in person somehow. So I hope that one day we can do this kind of format with this growing community somewhere in an in-person setting. That is all I wanted to say as we close out.
Season 3, maybe Inspired Places. All right, cool. Well, listen, thank you again, guys, for your contributions today, both attendees and speakers. We'll go ahead and drop this table real quick so we can get a picture, and everybody will pop up. We can do a dance party, right, Dave? Your favorite part, the Gen X breakdown. Oh, maybe. Can we do it over here, Sarah? Because we don't have any pictures of people up. So do we mind doing it on this one? So
I don't have a lot of my millennial counterparts that come to these sessions. It tends to be the coolest generation that lives, which is Gen X, that shows up a lot here.
I'm a millennial.
But it is,
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
it is a generalization that I feel like is officially accurate now, that Gen X loves to dance.
Just
in
give
the
it a minute.
metaverse.
As soon as we smile for the camera.
I just proved that.
I'm gonna dance with my Xers.
Yeah. All right. That's right. Awesome. Well, we'll just dance it out.